Okay, let's move to one of your worst ones here. And I was a little surprised. This one's a surprise to me. David Montgomery, running back 16, 50th overall player. David Montgomery, why are you down on him this year, JJ? At least relative to running back 16 ADP.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is on Yahoo, running back 16 is really, really rich. For me, if you look at Montgomery, where does he thrive? Why are we drafting him in fantasy football? The number one reason is because of touchdowns. We saw Jamal Williams in 2022 go absolutely bonkers and have so much goal line work and, be a fantasy relevant asset as a result. Last year, David Montgomery, pretty much the same deal. He was pretty touchdown dependent, but he was scoring touchdowns, and that's very important. But if you take a step back, I mentioned all the stuff about the Lions earlier and about how we could see some regression with that offense just in terms of scoring touchdowns. I'm not expecting them to see 2 touchdowns per game instead of 3.3, but I do think that, we're going to see somewhat of a dip. But I think the bigger point with Montgomery is he's probably more of just a floor play than a ceiling play. That seems so backwards to people because he can score a lot of touchdowns. But my fear is, number one, he's not going to see that much work through the air. We've seen that now. We saw that last year with Jahmyr Gibbs. There's kind of like a tale of 2 parts, or not even 2 halves necessarily, but at least 2 parts of that season for Montgomery last year, where from weeks 1 through 6, he was healthy. And during that stretch, this was the pre-injury stretch, he had a 61% running back rush share per game, 6% target share per game. And 2 of these games were without Jahmyr Gibbs, for the record. 6% target share per game, 16.6 PPR points per game during that stretch. Then he comes back in week 10. From week 10 onward, that running back rush share dropped by about 7 percentage points. The target share dropped by 1 percentage point, and he ended up scoring 3.5 fewer PPR points per game, down the stretch from week 10 onward. Now, I know that, again, from week 1 to 6, Jahmyr Gibbs wasn't there for part of that stretch, but the goal line split between the 2 at the start of the season was 8-1. So Jahmyr Gibbs had 1, that's in 4 games. Jahmyr Gibbs had 1 goal line rush. David Montgomery had 8 through those 6 games. The goal line split from week 10 when David Montgomery got back through the end of the season and into the playoffs. So I'm including the playoff sample here too. 11-10. There was almost a 50-50 split between Gibbs and Montgomery, at the goal line. And that's the fear. If David Montgomery doesn't see 75 or 80% of their goal line rushes this year, he's going to have a pretty tough time in fantasy football because of all players that are being drafted that early, he's the one guy that's probably the most touchdown dependent. And we're doing it for good reason. He's in an offense that should be good. He's the bruiser of the 2, but they started to use Gibbs in that role a little bit more. And that's the fear for me. And I mean, Gibbs to me is a special talent. He's very, very good. He's obviously going to see a lot of work through the air. I don't think Montgomery's going to see a lot of work through the air. So at that price point, this is one of those situations, unlike Zamir White, where I think there are other running backs that I just straight up would rather have than Montgomery in that range. But then obviously there's going to be some tight ends and some wide receivers there too that I would rather draft.
So I agree with you. There are tight ends and wide receivers I would definitely rather draft in his range. I will say that I'm curious as to who the running backs are that you like more, because I struggle to find running backs going after him that I really like more than David Montgomery. But before I get to that, I will say it did go very much kind of maybe under the radar how much Jahmyr Gibbs improved as a between the tackles runner late in the season. Yeah. So there is a real fear that that Montgomery loses just a lot of base early down work and even potentially goal line work, as you mentioned, to David Montgomery. I do kind of think that's priced in a little bit at running back. I have him at running back 17, not running back 16, big whoop there. But the guys going after him: Aaron Jones, Alvin Kamara, Kenneth Walker, James Conner, Raheem Mostert, Ramondre Stevenson, Zamir White, and then those other guys I mentioned when we talked about Zamir White. The only one I think I definitely like better than Montgomery there is probably Ramondre Stevenson. So are there other guys in that group that you definitely like more than Montgomery?
I think the next 3 that you named, what was it? Kamara, Walker,
Aaron Jones, and Aaron Jones. Yeah. And then James Conner.
I'm more intrigued by those 3 just because with Walker, I think they're going to score points in a similar way, right? And I think that Walker is just a more explosive runner than David Montgomery is. So I'm going to just give him the edge, even though, offensive line wise, obviously it's night and day between the 2. Mm-hmm. But I just think he's just a better home run hitting back. He's just a better running back in general than David Montgomery is. With Kamara, now I will openly admit that Kamara has been, I think for any fantasy analyst, one of the toughest ranks of the season.
100%, yeah.
Because look what he did last year coming back. I mean, he caught 75 passes. Like it's really, really difficult when you combine what we know of Alvin Kamara. We see an offensive coordinator shift in New Orleans. We know that the opportunity, and on top of the Kendra Miller stuff, that's what I wanted to get out. I couldn't think of it. The Kendra Miller stuff, like, how often do you see a second year player just getting destroyed by his head coach in the media, like week in and week out?
The only other one is A.T. Perry, who happens to play for the same head coach.
Yeah. Like the Saints hate all of their players, except for Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and Alvin Kamara.
I don't even know if they like Chris Olave that much.
Yeah, that's true.
I think the only one that Dennis Allen is like universally really nice to, well, the two guys he's universally really nice to in the press is like Jamal Williams and Taysom Hill, which perfect.
It's true. But here's my point. Like, if Kamara walks away from this season with 60 to 70 catches, no one's going to be surprised at all, right? So I'd rather take Kamara there, even though he has age not on his side. Aaron Jones, I obviously you can go either way. I gravitate towards the pass catchers because it's so important in fantasy football in all formats, even standard formats. And Aaron Jones to me has been arguably, I say arguably because I don't want people coming at me, arguably the best pass catching back that we've seen over the last like 5 to 6 years. Like he's a very, very, very good pass catching back. And you look at that offense, number one, I think it's going to naturally just skew pass heavy a little bit just because of the way that Kevin O'Connell runs things, but they don't have many alternatives. Like I like Ty Chandler. Like you can throw the dart at Ty Chandler late too, so don't take that the wrong way. But I think I'd rather take the chance on a guy like Aaron Jones as sort of like, if we're talking about floor, because that's kind of what we're talking about with David Montgomery. Montgomery's ceiling really hits with that contingent upside, which I understand.
That was going to be my biggest pushback to this. I do think he has that contingent upside.
The difference though between like his contingent upside and someone else's is that that sort of is baked into his ADP to some degree because he's being drafted higher than where his like projection is. I always like to get the running backs who are being drafted like at projection or even below projection, who then also have that contingent upside, right? Whereas I don't know if that's totally there with Montgomery right now.
Yeah, that's fair. He has been a much better value on other sites than he has been necessarily on Yahoo. That is for sure with David Montgomery. 100%.